All right. So yes, as you introduced already, we had a research project called Großwohnsiedlungen der Zukunft. We recently, or as you already said, it was commended by the housing company Vonovia, that has a lot of apartments in Germany throughout the country. And yeah, we did this project together with some partners, mostly the DLR, Deutsches Zentrum für Luft- und Raumfahrt, as well as RWTH Aachen, and also another office, the SLU, working together with the DLR. And yeah, we have recently finished the final report. Last week we had a final conference where we had some people being with us in discussion rounds and in several input sessions. So yeah, there we already had the opportunity to present and to discuss the project, and I'm also glad that we can take a look on it again together here in this format of CBC talks. I would like to give you a short overview about the methodology that we used to generate the results that we finally had, and yeah, also the results, of course, like what we found out. And yes, so the main interest of the project from the side of Vonovia was to find out what could the effects of architectural characteristics be, but also the urban planning characteristics of the settlements, of the neighborhoods. But then also practically, how could they be developed and transformed in the future? Like what could they do to make the residential satisfaction to make it better, and also the living quality, the residential quality in general. So I have now some slides on the typology in general, but I think that many of you are already quite into that topic, and you know what large housing estates are about, but I'll nevertheless give a short introduction on the context and that we are doing the research. So we see the large housing estates, they have been introduced as a new typology in order to solve the post-war lack of housing. They were supposed to create a large amount of housing on a little amount of space. The creation was also benefiting from the Wirtschaftswunder, saying the economic growth of the Germany in that time after the war. They were supposed to organize urban growth, so to create an efficient use of land, often also in the suburbs. And they were based on different democratic ideas. So the main idea was also to generate socially mixed and high quality housing for many different population groups. So in the beginning, the settlements were perceived as modern, functional, and also luxurious housing for different social groups. This is, for example, a scheme of the gegliederte and aufgelockerte Stadt. That was a light built from that time. Of course, the neighborhoods, the large housing estates, were based on different ideas. They were following different principles, and that was one of them. And this is one of the neighborhoods that we have visited in the northern parts of Germany. I'll come back later to that. Then in the 1970s, the large housing estates suffered from a certain change of image. So due to the lack of functions and infrastructures in that areas, they were sometimes called Schlafstädte, like sleeping cities, because there wasn't a lot of everyday life. There was mostly residential functions and not much more. Lack of human scale and anonymity was often criticized due to the high number of apartments and also the serial building type. Technical issues emerged, what also led to a certain spiral of migration. So the households that had enough money, let's say, they started to leave the areas and left vacancies, and also led to a stronger social segregation. In the 1980s, that image got a bit solidified. So the municipalities, for example, also amplified that problem, let's say, because they try to control the social composition. They try to introduce mostly poor households, so people like in certain social economic groups, and so they contributed also to that social segregation. Yeah, and another point was also the negative media coverage. So in the media, the neighborhoods were often depicted as very bad areas where criminality and vandalism were very important, and those factors were emphasized quite a lot. So that negative perception got perpetuated, and the neighborhoods, yeah, were perceived as stigmatized places with low housing and residential quality, etc. Today, happily, we see that there is also more and more emphasis on the positive aspects. So, for example, the residents, we can see they often have a much better perception than people coming from outside, but I'll tell you a lot more about that also later on, because that was one of the important questions that we were asking ourselves. For example, they valorize certain qualities such as green spaces, social networks, and the connectivity with other residents. And also another point is that many studies, or some studies, this for example from the DIFU Institute, they highlight also the potential of large housing estates, and they are mentioning that they can contribute to recent urban challenges that we are facing. Like if you invest money in the right way, then they can really be livable and high quality type of housing. So all in all, we see that today the status quo is very ambivalent. So on the one hand, there are people who say it's a failed project, the architecture didn't accomplish what it has promised before, so the idea of being a high quality housing area for many different social groups could not have been reached, this objective. It is prospectless, some people also say, because of the high density, which is not adequate for many of these groups who are living there. The modern architecture is a stereotype or is negatively connotated in general in many cases. And also there are actual feelings of insecurity, which also has been reported to us by the Umfrage discussion with residents in the areas. So they came to us and they said us that there are really also problems with feeling insecure, and the media coverage doesn't help with that, because it's focusing really on the crime that is supposed to happen there. On the other hand, as I mentioned, we see that residents appreciate certain qualities that are really there, like that there are particularly affordable rents, which is not evident in many big cities nowadays, and also utilities that you can find there today, also the green space, social networks, etc. And also we found curious that many settlements or maybe large housing estates have a very good reputation and also long waiting lists, such as the Wohnpark Alt-Erla in Vienna, that is quite known, I guess, of Harry Glück, where you have very, very long waiting lists and you have to wait for many years in order to get an apartment. And also what I mentioned, the potential for sustainable development and transformation, also due to the density that they can provide, the social cohesion, demographic change, and other potentials for these challenges. So our research is based on this ambivalence, let's say. We have created the idea and the concept focusing on the challenges in the housing market that we can see today, such as pressure in the city centers, increasing rents, so apartments become more and more expensive, social segregation. At the same time, we have transformation requirements due to those urban challenges that I've just been mentioning, and also political goals coming from the federal state, for example, but also from the EU, like tackling the energy and climate crisis, the goal of net zero, so no more artificializing soil until 2050, creating up to 400,000 new apartments per year, goals like that. So we were asking ourselves, how can these objectives like be fulfilled? Yeah, how could that be reached? And isn't it a bit too I don't know, optimistic, like what could be a solution? And also yeah, so the large housing estates in general, they could maybe be part of the solution. That was a question that we have been asking ourselves, if they can contribute to the solution of these problems and objectives, because they can provide a high number of dwellings, of apartments on a very small area. So that could somehow be a good point already. And thus our research questions, they were focused first on whether or not the large housing estates can be a model for future housing, and also which needs for action can we find in the existing settlements, like what has to be done. And then we were also interested in the question, how can it be that some have such a good reputation and residential satisfaction, and they are like perceived so much better than others, and what could we maybe learn from these neighborhoods that seem to work quite well, such as the Wohnpark Alt-Erla. So our research questions were first focusing on the current state, what characterizes an attractive large housing estate, and which factors, physical and functional, contribute to the residential satisfaction. And then second, focusing on the future, let's say, on the transformation potential, how can a sustainable evolution look like, and the transformation of the existing areas, also take into consideration a sustainable development of new settlements. And the methodology, how we tackled this question, was that we looked at 4 different large housing estates, one in Dresden-Gorbitz, so they were all around Germany, but also in Austria. Dresden-Gorbitz first in the eastern part, Kiel-Mettenhof in the northern part, Köln-Chorweiler in the eastern area, and then Wien Alt-Erla in Austria. The research was followed by, was implemented by an integrative and multi-dimensional approach. Also thanks to our partners DLR and SLU, who were focusing mostly on the remote sensing data. So we had a GIS analysis. We looked at the land coverage, on the density and the height of buildings, the traffic area coverage for parking areas, but also the flowing traffic. And then also, for example, the green space supply. And that was followed by a qualitative analysis. So we did a photo documentation in order to analyze better the atmosphere in that areas, also the public space and the life in the neighborhoods, and also, for example, the state of the building fabric. So we did a photo documentation in order to be able to compare the different areas, and that was followed by an analysis of the subjective perception by a survey and expert interviews, for example, with local planners, people from local institutions such as neighborhood management or neighborhood meeting points, so such social actors, and surveys with the residents. And we had a high number of participation. We have in the end talked with 400 people, and that helped us a lot to better understand the areas, and also to I'll show you later how we did that, but to connect the data that we collected through this with the geo information. And here we can see some stepstones of the project, and we would also like to to have a follow-up project, because there are some things I will mention in the end that we would like to focus on some more, or that we're asking ourselves during the project, or questions that arrived in the aftermath. So the methodology was to first collect the data, the physical factors such as density, land cover, what I mentioned before, and functional factors such as the mix of uses in the areas, but also the public transport or the location of the areas. Then looking at the socio-economic and demographic information of the people that we were surveying or doing the survey with, such as educational level, profession, age, gender, and then in the end, the subjective perception, such as residential satisfaction and image of the neighborhood. And then in a second step, we overlaid that information. So we try to put everything together and to overlay these different kinds of data. And we did it first on a neighborhood and then also on a block level, because we supposed that on the block level we can have very much more precise answers than just having the average of all the data in all the different blocks, because they are very heterogeneous, the blocks one from another. And if we put everything together on a neighborhood level, then we cannot be as precise. So this block level approach was an important factor for us. And this helped us to generate these main findings that I would like to first sum up a little bit for you, and then we also go into detail. So first, we could really see that there is a ranking of the different neighborhoods. So as you can see, Alt-Erla was rated a lot better than the others. I mean, it has the highest rate of residential satisfaction. So this graphic shows or illustrates the answers given from the residents to the question how well do you feel in the area, how high is your satisfaction, or how happy are you. Then Chorweiler and Mettenhof, they are more or less the same, also a quite high satisfaction rate. And then in Gorbitz it was a bit lower. And then we can also see the difference on the block level. As I said, the block level was an important point for us. Here we can also see the different satisfaction rates on a smaller level. And what we also found out, that it is true for many areas that the inside perspective, so the perception of the residents themselves, is in many cases a lot better than the one from people coming from outside. So here we can see words such as, for example, the feeling of safety, or coziness, or nice, or clean, green. And we can see that the people coming from outside, they were more skeptic, and the residents, they gave more positive answers overall. And yes, so a short overview on all the findings that we finally had. So first, it is true, as I said, that the residents often have a better perception of the neighborhood than people coming from outside. And then an important finding, there can be found correlations between certain physical and functional features or factors on the one hand, and the residential satisfaction and the neighborhood image on the other hand. And I'll show you in detail which these are. So all in all, the thesis can be confirmed that the urban design can really have an influence on the satisfaction and image in large housing estates. And thus the study confirms that the physical has an effect on the social and the emotional. So, and in order to show you which are finally the factors, the physical and functional ones, that do have an impact, I prepared some slides differentiating these answers. So first, we could find that there is building population densities do play a role in residential satisfaction, but it is quite ambiguous. So often it is true that high densities have a rather negative impact on the residential satisfaction. As you can see here in Kiel-Mettenhof, for example, we see that on the left image, the density in the center areas is a bit higher, and also the satisfaction is a little bit lower. But then this result doesn't come true for all the areas. For example, in Wien-Alt-Erla, we found the highest density and at the same time the highest satisfaction. So we assume that there are also other aspects, mostly social ones, that play a role in that, and also the distances between the buildings could also determine the way how density is perceived in general. A second point was that mixed use or use mix has also an impact on the residential satisfaction, but contrarily to what we have assumed before, it was rather negative correlation. So the higher a mixed use is, the lower the residential satisfaction was, and that was quite curious for us because we were assuming that it would be the other way around. But then looking into details, it showed different results. So considering also the decentralization and the differentiation between the kind of use mix. So for example, a small scale organization of uses seemed indeed to have a positive impact rather than these extensive non-residential areas such as you can find in the city centers with these huge shopping centers or big Versorgungs supply infrastructure. And also what played a role was the rate of shared or common uses, such as in Köln-Chorweiler. Here you can see in pink and clear pink the common and public uses, while the blue ones are the private ones, and we can see that in the areas 4 in the blocks 1 and 4 there is a high number of these more like smaller community uses. Another factor that played a role was the supply of open and green spaces. So that was more or less coherent with what we had assumed before. So a high number of green space leads to a high residential satisfaction rate. For example, we can witness this on the neighborhood level in Dresden-Gorbitz and Wien-Alt-Erla. In Wien-Alt-Erla, the supply is very, very high, while in Gorbitz it was lower. And if you remember the slide I showed in the beginning, also the residential satisfaction was a bit distributed in that way. And also we can see it on the, here you can see that photo again, that illustration again. But also on a block level, we could see that the highest supplies of green spaces, so per person, also leads to higher satisfaction rates. So like here in Köln-Chorweiler. And but then on the other hand, what did not play a big role was the definition of functions in the green space. So we found out that also green spaces that do not have a clear function can though lead to a residential satisfaction. So it is not maybe not in every case necessary to really concretize which functions should a green space have, but also informal green space that can be freely used by residents also do have an important impact on the residential satisfaction. Then the next factor was the proportion of traffic areas that had an impact on the residential satisfaction. So also what we imagined being the case before was true for many cases that we found. So the proportion of space for flowing and stationary traffic can lead to lower satisfaction, while traffic-free areas such as Wien-Alt-Erla, as you can see here, the inside area is very free from cars, so everything that you can see here between the buildings is actually green, and it's not possible to go there by car. It's perceived in a very positive way, and this is more the classic distribution of spaces, I would say, like where you can go by car throughout the neighborhood, and there are parking areas in many places. Then the next one is that the status of renovation and appearance of the house or the apartment and the building, as well as improvement measures also in the public space, can contribute to the residential satisfaction and the neighborhood image. So yeah, we could see that correlation, for example, in Kiel-Mettenhof and Dresden-Gorbitz, but also in Köln-Korweiler, as you can see here, the Pariser Platz that has been renovated recently. And so many people coming from outside that we were asking in the survey, they were telling us that they feel much better now, or that they can really perceive a difference. And they say that the image has changed quite a lot and they are not as scared anymore. And it really makes a difference if the public space is in a good state. So yes, that was another important factor. The next one was also the social and cultural composition of the neighborhood that has an indirect impact, let's say. So as we could see by comparing the different neighborhoods, was that the evolution of the social and cultural composition over time is very strongly perceived by residents and outsiders and can be very different from one place to another. So for example, in Eastern Germany, we have a different situation than in Western Germany, as in the Western areas, we are more, let's say, used to migration, since many people from other countries came to the areas in order to help in the mines, in the Ruhrgebiet, for example, with all the coal mining. So that was an important factor of the economy, and in the eastern parts it was a bit different. So we can see that in Eastern Germany there was a very quick change, or a very rapid change in the composition of the society, and many immigrants just came by 2015 with the refugees from Syria and other Eastern European or Asian countries. So that contributed to a very, very quick change, and could have led to an excessive social demand. So the people in the areas, they first had to get used to these changes, and that could have contributed to or could have affected the social coexistence between different groups. So we can see, for example, comparing Köln-Korweiler and Dresden-Gorbitz, that this was an answer to the question, or to the explanation, if migrants and refugees are welcome in the neighborhood. In Köln-Korweiler, almost everyone said yes, and in Dresden-Gorbitz, not even half said yes, these people are welcome here. And we assume that it is really due to this excessive social demand and people being overwhelmed by these rapid changes. And then the seventh and last factor for now is that the spatial overlap of certain features that are perceived in a negative way play an important role also on satisfaction and image. So where in areas where there is an overlay of different features, such as high density, low green space supply, high amount of traffic areas, can indeed lead to low residential satisfaction. That is what we found out in our data. And this is often the case in the neighborhood centers. So in the centers, those are the areas where many of these negative factors are coming together, and where also the satisfaction was in general lower. But yeah, coming to the conclusions. First, one of our conclusions was that the neighborhoods are very heterogeneous, like also one neighborhood, or only looking at one neighborhood, also inside of it, it's very heterogeneous. So there are very many different areas in every neighborhood, but then we could find different block typologies appearing in different neighborhoods. So there are also similarities between the different neighborhoods, whether they are in Eastern, Western, Northern Germany or Austria. So some similar block typologies could be found. And that helped us a lot to understand better the structures, and also in the end to formulate propositions for actions, because in the end, all these block typologies, because they are so different, they have different needs for actions and also different transformation potentials. So you cannot deal, for example, with a very central area the same way as you do it with the outskirt, let's say. So these very low density and mostly residential areas, they have to be, they have to have different measures and different answers. So we tried to develop a typology of blocks. I'm just clicking through very quickly, looking on the time. We don't have time, I think, to see everything in detail, but I think the main idea, you can also understand it like this. For example, this is what we called urban center. Here we can see a high building and population density, a high level of mixed use, mostly centralized, and mostly supply functions such as shopping, services, and also administrative functions, a low proportion of green space, a high proportion of traffic areas, and mostly a good public transport connection, because it's there where many different modes of transport overlap. And these we could find in these areas, for example. And then another one, just to give you a short comparison, areas also in the central parts of the neighborhoods, but also with a high density, but mostly residential uses, and also social functions such as daycare centers, schools, etc. Maybe a little bit more of green space, but still not so much, and a high proportion of traffic areas. And then scrolling through the slides, there is a change depending on where the areas are. They also somehow change in density, in use, green space, and traffic. Okay, this takes a time because the images are so big. These typologies that we called park quarters are the only type that could only be found in Alt-Erla, because it is a very specific block type. We assume that they can also be found in different areas, maybe such as the Olympic village, for those who know, in Munich. We also thought that it is a bit similar because we have this terrace typology and also the high amount of green space around the buildings and the traffic-free areas. But for now, we could only find it in Wien Alt-Erla. And then on the interface between the recommendations, the very concrete recommendations for transformation and development of the areas, and the findings that I just explained, there was we developed some general conclusions or general thesis for future large housing estates in Germany that have to be kept in mind for these developments. So I also just scroll a bit through, and to some of them I'll come back later as well. So for example, the large housing estates, they take on important tasks for the city as whole, because they provide a high number of affordable housing, of green space areas, of supply functions, and they are thus an important place for the city as a whole. They offer important potentials with regard to sustainable urban development, such as we could see in the beginning concerning the density, the high number of housing or apartments that can be offered on a very small amount of space. Large housing companies have a high social responsibility. I'll come back to that later. And it is worth investing in the housing stock, because we have seen that the measures that were implemented in the neighborhood, they had indeed a high effect on the residential satisfaction and the neighborhood image. And then we could say that it is important, or sustainable large housing estates, they need to be socially and functionally mixed. And yeah, measures for the development or also the transformation of the area, they have to answer to the specific potentials and restrictions of the neighborhood. So you cannot just like implement all the measures in the same amount in every area, but you have to really have a good idea of the local context and on their potentials and restrictions. Redensification, we found that is a very critical point in many cases, because residents are often not very okay with redensifying the areas, mostly because of the green space that they valorize as a very important factor of the areas, or a very important point that gives a lot of quality to the settlements. So it has to also meet the acceptance of the local residents and give them benefits, so that they also can like benefit from the development. And you also have to be very sensitive with that. And then also a sensible combination of privacy and community is needed, so that the living in these very dense areas, or that the coexistence between many people on such a small space can really work. So we are coming to the end, more or less. So in the end, we formulated some recommendations. First, concerning the transformation of existing neighborhoods. So what could actually be done in the neighborhoods that already exist? For that, we have this let's say Wimmelbild. I don't know the English term, but you can see here a combination in one picture with many measures, or all the measures that we proposed, such as, for example, measures of improvement of the image itself, enhancement of the image, such as facades, public spaces, implementation also of magnets, or conducting image campaigns, then improvement of the housing quality itself and in the existing stock, for example, regular renovations, barrier-free design of entrance areas, and maybe adding up balconies in cases where you can. Then complementation and differentiation of the housing offer. So for example, also adding even more affordable housing, because it is so much needed right now, combining maybe existing small apartments and like creating bigger ones in the cases where you have the possibility to do that, in order to answer to different kinds of demands and needs. Adding also high quality offers for new user group in order to have a better social mix. And then also functional additions, such as social infrastructures, cultural functions, and also non-commercial ones. And then in the end, enhancing free space and design, such as elimination of anxiety areas, removing garbage, implementing prevention measures concerning this, adding community gardens and offers for all the user groups, especially kids and teenagers, who are often a bit neglected in public space design. And then, of course, also establishing sustainable structures where you can, for example, adding solar panels, because you have a high number of facades and roofs where there could be the possibility to do so. Also roof and facade greenery, and also in order to cool the buildings a bit down, because the heat effects are very strong there, insulation of buildings, etc. And then in the next step, we also gave some recommendations on the possibility to create new large housing estates, which is a big question itself. So was also, for example, a point that we have discussed on last week in the final conference, like whether or not we should build large housing estates again, maybe not in the way as we did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, but what could we learn from that? But that's not the topic today, and I think that needs a big public discourse in general, also a political one. But then if you were supposed to create new ones, we tried to develop some principles on what to consider if you want to do so. So the, sorry, it's in German, but I try to translate. So for example, the size of the neighborhood, the connection with the city as a whole, a diversity on a typological level, but also on a social level, have decentralized functions, also having non-commercial ones, having a high rate of green space and a small one on traffic areas, also having spaces that are not programmed, so they have such as not having a clear determination of functions, having a good public transport connection and also affordable mobility, and then all the sustainability aspects that I have mentioned also for the existing ones, like facades, greenery, and good heating and energy systems. So coming to the overall conclusions, as I said in the beginning, we could indeed find that there is a discrepancy between residents and people coming from outside, but it is way more complex than we have expected. So for example, also the residents, they mention sometimes things that are not going well or that have to be improved. On the other hand, also outsiders, they don't have per se a negative image, but they are also being impacted in a positive way by all the measures that have already taken place. Then also large housing estates can be attractive and future-oriented type of settlement. That is also a point that the study showed. So the existing housing stock already has a very, very high potential of quality living. Also comparing to the political goals of creating a high number of new apartments, then the type also has a high potential to affordable housing and sustainable development or transformation, concerning, for example, the ecologic, social and economic perspective. So looking at the density, the short distances, but also the affordability of housing, the social cohesion between the residents, etc. And so our main point here again, as you could see, we found a high correlation between physical functional factors and the residential satisfaction and neighborhood image, which leads us to the point that it is indeed worth it to invest in the housing stock. And the study showed which kinds of improvement measures are most useful or can imply the most positive aspects, impacts. But then also the acceptation of measures by the residents is an important point. For example, as we saw, redensification can be a very unclear point, or a point that has to be debated upon. And then, as I mentioned before, housing companies have a high social responsibility, because indeed we could have seen or we could see that there is a big impact, or a big correlation between the functional and physical factors of an area and their perception. So taking a look at the stigmatization of many neighborhoods that is still there. We showed that there can be measures implemented to have an impact on that, and also to have an impact on how the neighborhoods are perceived and how the housing quality of the neighborhood can be enhanced or can be improved. So sorry, I don't know why it's not the right sense now, but some more open questions for the research. As I said, I would like to, or we would like to look on in maybe upcoming projects for, like for example, we would like to see if the theses are also reliable, looking at new examples, like if we apply our research methodology to new neighborhoods or to other neighborhoods, do we have the same results, or are there maybe other physical and functional characteristics that play a role? Can also the identified block types be found in other cities or regions? Are there maybe other ones, and how do they depend on regional differences or on regional specificities in general? So for example, is there a difference between Western and Eastern German areas, or Northern and Southern ones? And how can we like distinguish these factors, like the physical and functional ones? Also, what would be an interesting point would be to look at more references. So which examples of neighborhoods that have already been transformed or developed could be also a good reference for housing companies, and what can be possible approaches and instruments to strengthen the motivation of housing companies. So for example, creating densification or adding stories to a building, and at the same time oblige them to also renovate the existing stock. So giving them an opportunity to rent more space, but then making them renovate the existing ones.